Thiessen.
With me today is abundance teacher and money coach, Jody Lynn Creighton.
This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Jody Lynn, this has been a throwback week, or a lot of ways you can say that, but it's a throwback to the way I used to do the show, because it's only in the last few years I started bringing all these guests onto the show. But before that, I would just have co-hosts. Every single day would be a different co-host. And this week is a throwback because Monday's guest had to cancel at the last moment. And Monday evening, I also do the second episode with Joel, and Joel had laryngitis, so we couldn't do that one. And today, you and I were waiting, and our guest couldn't make it today. So we're going to have an entire week's worth of shows where we have no guests. That's a throwback to what we used to do.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun.
Yeah. I love it.
It's also fortuitous. And the reason it's fortuitous is I came up with something that I talked about with Anne Marie on Monday, and she was all enthusiastic about it. And I was just sharing about it with you before we got started here. You were enthusiastic too. I think I've kind of stumbled onto something here.
I think so.
Because it's about trying to resolve an issue that I've talked about a lot here on the show, and others have talked about a lot on the show too, which is how do you sustain a high vibe? We have a lot of tools for getting us to high vibe. Mm-hmm. We've got meditation, we've got affirmations, we've got little games you can play, right? We've got various kinds of mindfulness activities you can do. We've got the activities that Abraham Hicks puts in the back of their books. You know, there's the wouldn't it be nice if process. You know, there's a whole bunch of these processes you can do. Well, wouldn't it be nice if you could actually do those with somebody every day? That's what I kept thinking, because that's what it really needs. I mean, we get this, you and I get this, and Emery and I get this, and Joel and I get this when we do these episodes every week. We get the big jolt, and listeners get it to an extent, because when you listen, you pick up some of it. You get it as sort of a residual, but it's bigger when you're doing it rather than when you're listening to it. And I wanted listeners to be able to have that aspect of it too, and I wanted to have that aspect more often in my life, because I want to get that high vibe going on a regular basis, not just sometimes, not have it, not have that up curve and then it slides off, and then try to get an up curve going and then it slides off. I want to keep it going regularly.
Yeah. So, it's like the adage of if I had a trainer or if I had somebody to go with to the gym, then I'd actually make it there.
Right.
You know, like I used to go to the gym like way back in the day with one of my friends at 5 a.m. But the only reason that I would go is because she is standing outside of my house at 5 a.m. Or I had to pick her up at 5 a.m. and we'd go to the gym together. Like it wouldn't be, we're just meeting each other there. Like I was her ride or she was my ride. Like I had to go because somebody was there. But in the context of high vibration, like meeting with somebody to start that, I think it's brilliant.
It's funny too, because our friend Joel is actually tuned in. He's listening in here. And when I mentioned that he had laryngitis, he put it into the chat. Yes, I do. But he would also, he would be really interested in what you said about going to the gym, because he's a gym nut. He goes every single day. He's been going for like 50 years.
Wow.
And he's just like that. If he didn't have that in his life, it would actually detract from his life. That's how deeply ingrained that habit is. And I still marvel at the fact that I've seen a video of him doing this. He can lift 500 pounds. Can you imagine?
No. No.
It's like, that's crazy.
No.
It shows how much he loves it, because he's become a power lifter over the years, just because he keeps going every single day, because that's where he gets a high vibe from doing that. Plus he gets it from his work and from other areas too.
Yeah.
So it shows you can do it, and it shows you can also get some pretty amazing results when you do it, right? But what can we do to make it available to a wider range of population? That's the question that I've been kind of off and on working with for years now here on the show. And I've gotten some really cool input, really interesting ideas from guests, from co-hosts and so forth. There's the stuff that Joel and I have talked about. When David Strickle was on, we talked about the TIA program. That's really great for uprooting stuff that is blocking your vibration and so forth, so you can feel lighter and feel more high vibrational and so forth. But I'm still looking for, what does it take to actually keep you on track when you have trouble developing your habits?
Especially
with habits.
Yeah. And especially with the world that we live in today and the constant noise. My friend and I were just talking about this earlier today,
Mhm.
the fabric of our society and how we're inundated with a lot of negativity or different things that bring us back to the old way of being or societal norms that we're trying to repattern or subconscious beliefs. There's all of these things. The way I see it in my mind is more like instead of a blanket, but the bottom of a trampoline, how it's so
Mhm.
woven together.
Right.
That is what we've created over however long that you've lived, that fabric of or root of your entire life that's there. So how do you start going from that place to being high vibrational when that whole fabric around you is taking you in a different direction potentially?
Especially since it's not like the fabric stops.
No.
It's
It just keeps
constantly growing.
adding.
Yeah.
It becomes a cocoon.
A cocoon. Yeah, it's a good analogy.
Yeah.
That's that comfort zone that's not so comfortable,
hmm
right?
But it's scary on the other side.
Oh
But I
yeah.
mean, when you have somebody to do it with you, then it's not so scary.
Yes. Well, it's not so
Yep.
scary. It's also easier to stay true to it. I mean,
Absolutely.
I think probably everybody at one time or another, certainly those who listen to this podcast and people who are in our circles, everybody at one time or another has tried, for instance, meditation.
Mhm.
I know I have. There have been
Mhm.
times where I've been doing it regularly. Do I meditate now? Not very often.
No.
I mean, did I get some value from it? Yeah, I did. So why didn't I keep it going? I think I got bored, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's so many dimensions to being human that we're constantly in this evolution of self. So it feels good one day and then doesn't, and like that's part
Mhm.
of your comfort zone and all of these other things. So you get bored or like, oh, I don't
Right.
need it anymore.
Yep.
The other visual that came to me also in a positive of doing something like this every single day is, we always hear about planes and how they're not on course 100% of the time,
Right.
but they're
Yes.
constantly redirecting or like changing just I don't even know what the proper words are, but like just a little bit here this direction, a little bit this direction, like counterbalancing or whatever it is to stay on
Readjusting,
course.
basically. They're always
Yeah,
adjusting.
readjusting. Exactly. But even if you started your day with something like that, and then by the end of the day, you got to completely back to where you were before, whatever, like most people, it would be like a week or months or maybe years, like depends on what's going on in your life before you come back to that practice or come back to that vibration. So
Mhm.
the daily side of things is so influential because, you're
Yes.
only a little bit off course and then you're corrected again, and then maybe a little bit off course and then corrected like that plane. You'll get to your destination faster with that theory.
That's a great analogy. I like that. It
Thank
really does describe it, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
describes why it is we don't stick to the development stage of the habits.
Yeah, absolutely. And because you don't see the massive results, like we're
Right.
an instant gratification kind of society. Like,
Yep.
let's see it now,
Yep.
right now. But when you're doing work like this and changing the inner, a lot of times, especially because of the way our brain works with the reticular activator, we're so focused on what we've already seen. And our brain is like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go find examples of that. Great. But we haven't even told it, no, I want to see more examples of what this influence is doing on my life now. So we haven't probably even noticed all of the, teeny tiny things that are going right. But it's not like this giant pot of gold after a week or two of doing it. So yeah.
There's also another little counterbalancing act that goes on too, because one of the things we talk about is living in the now.
Yeah.
Well, for many people, the now isn't all that nice.
Yeah.
It's not a really fun place necessarily,
Yeah, or they haven't been had enough practice
Mhm.
in seeing the great things that are in their life. They've been so focused on
Yes.
all of the crappy things that are happening that you're like, okay, tell me what you're grateful for. And they're like, nothing.
Can you play the Jeopardy theme for me while I play this out?
Right? Exactly. Or they'll think of one or two things. But the more you're focused on something, the more and you're practicing it, it's like just like a muscle. You're building that muscle of gratitude, positivity, the muscle of being in that other vibration, that higher vibration.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. So it always comes back to the same question for me. So how do you do that? How do you get that daily thing going? And like we've been saying, how do you do it with somebody else? I mean, at one point I came up with the idea of like a buddy system. I created a Facebook group and some people from the podcast, joined up and so forth. But the problem was we couldn't quite synchronize because everybody has different schedules, so nobody was ever in the same place at the same time. We tried to have an event, but people couldn't all show up for the event. The timing was difficult. It's one of the reasons why it's always useful to have a coach. But we can't afford to hire a coach. I mean, if you're a coach, if I were to hire you to do this, it'd probably cost me $50,000 a year. I can't afford to do that. Most people can't come close to affording to do that. So what's the solution? How do you get it to the point where you're working with somebody every day, especially setting off your day, starting off in the beginning of the day? If you're married to somebody and your spouse is willing to do it, that can be good, but even there, that's not always doable. Even there, that's not always a possibility. So how do you pull that off? And that's what I thought about for the longest time. I think I may have found the answer. I asked myself, well, what kind of skills are involved here? So for the person who's the coach, quote unquote, right? What kind of coaching is actually involved? Well, it's actually not a whole lot of coaching. It's more like just kind of leading somebody through some positive conversations and mental games and so forth. It's not a super high skill thing.
No.
So that means it's something you can teach to a lot of different people. So who do you teach to? Well, it can't be somebody who lives in a first world country because we can't afford any of them anyway. Even if they're not a coach, we still can't afford them. How about somebody from a third world country? That's the thought that came to me. And initially, the very first country that I thought of was the Philippines. The reason I thought of the Philippines, I actually have experience working with Filipinos. I have a Filipino who works as my office manager for the gardening business, actually.
Okay.
So she works from the Philippines. She answers the phone and so forth using, online technologies.
Cool.
Yeah. And the reason I like the Filipinos for something like this is Filipino people. I mean, it's always dangerous to stereotype, right? Across the board stuff is never going to be true for everybody. But you can at least describe certain tendencies that are true. And a big tendency that Filipinos have is they're very even-keeled. Very even. It takes a lot to upset it. You can do it. I mean, believe me, it can be done.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do. They're just something about their cultural temperament. They are just well suited to dealing with stressful situations and not kicking it back at somebody.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily good for them. That's another topic we could get into, but but the point is that they have a certain I wouldn't want to say that they're as a culture that they're optimistic, but they have the ability to be optimistic pretty easily because it fits that mindset, that personality trait, if you will. So that I like that about them. I also like the idea that because there are pretty close ties between the Americas, Canada, the U.S., even Mexico with the Philippines. It's a fairly easily accessible labor pool if you know how to do it. And there's a great website you can go to. If anybody who's got a business they want to hire a Filipino, go to onlinejobs.ph. It's a wonderful website. It's literally for just posting to Filipinos if you want to hire a Filipino.
Wow.
So yeah, really cool. And very cheap too. I think it's like $69 a month or something like that to post all the ads you want to post. It's ridiculous.
Wow.
In the age of Indeed.com and so forth, where it's like $89 a resume, it's fairly inexpensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really cool. So I hired a Filipino. I hired a young lady. Her name is Grace. And we've been working for about it'll be 5 days that we've worked so far. We had a couple days we missed last week. So over the course of a 9-day period, we've gotten together five mornings. And all we're doing is we are talking about positivity because she's into positive psychology. That's one of the reasons I hired her. I also hired
Yeah.
her because she has a very bubbly personality. She's very upbeat and so forth.
Hmm.
And we also play processes, games. We come up with activities to raise the vibe. And she's loving it, and I'm loving it too. I mean, it's really fun.
Yeah.
really-
Well, what a job. You get to play games
And get paid for it. Yeah.
and you get paid for it. Like,
Yeah.
wow. I think
And you
that's
don't have to pay
awesome.
very much because their cost of living is so much less than ours that
Yeah.
a much lower wage is a good wage for them, So
Yeah.
it's
It
a
goes a
really,
lot further. Yeah.
it goes a lot farther. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really a win-win all the way around. And she's getting very excited about doing it, really excited. So I'm thinking about turning it into a service because I also had a bunch of other people who applied for it. That's the other thing. If you place an ad on onlinejobs.ph, guaranteed you're not going to get 1 or 2 replies. I promise.
You're going to get a bunch.
You're going to get a bunch. And I mean, depending on how general your job is, you're going to get a huge bunch. I mean,
Wow.
it's so common to get so many replies that on a job that is a relatively easy job for somebody to do, a relatively low skill level, they put limits on. You can only have 250 replies or something like that because it just gets enormous in terms of how many people who reply to these things.
Yeah.
Like
incredible.
you're hiring one person. How do you pick from 250? I don't know.
No kidding.
You pick one,
Yeah. Needle in a haystack. I
Right.
want to know though, Walt, how are you feeling after each of your sessions?
Well, that's also the interesting part because one of the things that we're both doing this too, is we're journaling about how we feel before we start a session and after we start a session using the 1 to 10 scale.
Ooh, love it.
So typically so far, both of us have been around 5 or 6 when we start. And by the end of the session, we're typically anywhere from 7 to 9. So we're going up 2 to 3 points every time.
Wow.
So
That's awesome.
So we're definitely getting that boost, right? That we're
Yeah.
getting that rise into the higher vibe state. But the real question is, how long does it stay?
Yeah.
Now
And?
we know it takes 30 days before you really start feeling an effect of a new habit you're building, and about 90 to 120 days before the habit really ingrains itself. The neuroplasticity just needs time to do its work. Okay. I'm only 5 days in. I'm already experiencing some positive results. So we've beaten the 30-day number already. And in fact, I'm really looking forward to seeing what other results we can get after 30 days. But in terms of how long the effect lasts, I've been kind of subjectively paying attention to that afterward and writing it down in many cases. I have to write it down more studiously. I have to be more scientific than I have been, but I have been writing it down sometimes. And I'm finding on average, it's holding for about 2 to 3 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Now it does get impacted by what happens in my day. So
Of course.
if I'm writing that high vibe and all of a sudden something happens that I really don't like, I'm not going to stay high vibe even if it's only been an hour and a half. I mean, I'm going to come down. That's just part of what happens. But nevertheless, I'm feeling the difference already, just 5 days into it. I can tell it's improving. I can tell that I've got a good shot, like even within 30 days of having like most of my day feel good.
Yeah.
And by good, I don't mean just good. I mean like, whoa,
Really good.
Like, oh, this feels really, really good.
Yeah. I would be curious too, Walt. Okay, so you start your day at a 5 or something like that, and say you potentially go to a 9 after this call, and like 2 hours after that, something happens, whatever. That brings you down to a what? Where do you go in relation to, this is a 2-part question. Where do you go in relation to where you would have went before? Like, are you landing at a 5 again? Like you're pissed off, but it's like a level 5 rather than like -5. And then after that, within an hour or 2 after the dispute has resolved or whatever it is, are you gravitating back up to that 9, or like where are you landing? Like if you were to flow chart it out, is it more you're up and then you might come down, but then you're coming back to a higher high than you would have normally?
And I can't tell you that I've been tracking that because I haven't, but I can kind of
That's a lot to track.
what's happening. Well, like I said, I'm trying to be scientific about this.
Yeah.
But I can give you a reading on what it has felt like, what it feels like. And this has been always consistent with any time I've had a new process that I've tried that I liked. I'm finding that I'm bouncing back from negative situations faster.
That's
And
awesome.
probably not going as far down the spiral.
Yeah.
I can't say that for sure. I mean, I kind of want to say that just because that would be a great thing to say, but I'm not 100% sure if that's true. I think it is, but I mean, it's only 5 days data. It's hard to tell from 5 days. It's a very limited data set.
Well, and there's also the belief that things can't happen that fast or change that
Yeah.
fast, that you're very scientific. So you believe things take a certain amount of time. So that will heavily influence your results.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Right.
So-
Which is why I think you have to do it over a long period of time.
Yeah,
So that you can actually see for your, because a lot of this is about convincing yourself.
absolutely. Yeah.
I had an interesting conversation. I had my I just finished up my physical therapy. I think I told you I've been doing physical therapy because of an Achilles issue since last May. I finally did my last therapy session today. My therapist is convinced that I'm pretty much there. I just need to keep doing the practices she's taught me to do. So anyway, we were talking, and I told her about this idea, and she was really enthused about it. And I said, there's something I wanted to ask you. I said, now, the average person in the public would look at what you do and say, well, you do physical manipulations on people to help them get better, which she does. That is what she does. I said,
Yeah.
but how do you think about that? I said, how much of it for you is mental and how much of it is physical activity? And without hesitating, she said 95% mental.
Wow.
95%. And
Wow.
and I could tell from what she told me over the next few minutes that she was being conservative when she said 95%. She really wanted to say 100%.
Wow.
She even described to me how when she's doing a session, when she's working with somebody, let's say, well, in my case, it was an injured Achilles. So, manipulating the Achilles, kind of helping to retrain the body to do certain things and so forth. She's carrying on conversation with the client, which she did with me. And at first I didn't recognize what she was doing. Over time, I realized, wait a minute, this is part of the therapy. What she's doing is part of the therapy. And she confirmed it today. She said, yeah, that is what part of the therapy, because pain is subjective, which means it is driven by our mental processes. There's no actual place in the body that is the pain place.
Yeah.
I mean, there are centers in the brain that tend to be the detectors of pain, but pain is so subjective that, for instance, there are martial artists who can put their hands in a flame and not feel pain.
Yeah.
Their skin is burning, and they have trained themselves to not feel pain. Now, I personally don't admire that activity, but but I admire the fact that they can do that. And it really illustrates it is a mental thing. It is not physical. Pain is mental.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that means that if you're a physical therapist trying to help people overcome pain because of injuries or whatever to various parts of their body, you're dealing with the human mind.
Yeah.
And she confirmed it 100%. In fact, she even I couldn't even tell you what some of the things she said, because she was digging into her trade practices to tell me some stuff. But what I could tell what it amounted to was they have, what was the one? She had two terms that she used, DIM and SIM. I don't remember what SIM and DIM stood for, but basically SIM is wherever you are in a belief state that you're going to get better, and DIM is when you're in the belief state when you're not. That's essentially what it amounts to.
Yeah.
And this is actually part of what they teach therapists when they go to therapist school.
I didn't know that.
I didn't either. Yeah. But this is part of what they do. They talk about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it is impactful.
It is. Oh, yeah, literally.
Yeah. Because if you believe you can, you can. And if you believe you can't, you can't, Yeah. It's that adage. Absolutely. Wow.
How fascinating that even with something as scientific, and let me tell you that what the physical therapists know these days about the human anatomy is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
The degree of understanding compared to even 25, 30 years ago is off the charts.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, even with all that, they're still heavily, heavily, heavily focused on the mental side.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's changed, where it's gone more towards the mental as they've recognized how powerful the mental truly is in the experience.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's not like they don't understand and appreciate that, healing does take time. It does require certain kinds of things to do. There are physical things you have to do in order to heal.
Yeah.
They do that. Oh my goodness, you would not believe how many exercises she has taught me more exercises to do than I can even remember. And that's not exaggerating.
Yeah.
I often forget some of them. I've got it narrowed down, and she was perfectly fine with us. She actually advocates it, but I narrowed it down to the ones that I got the most value of, and those are the ones that I do.
Yeah.
Which for me are basically riding an exercise bike and doing what we call a funny walk.
A funny walk.
A funny walk, yeah. You know how when you walk, when you're walking properly, you tend to walk with like an uplift with every step. So you put your foot out, and then you kind of, you come off your heel onto your toes as you're doing your walk, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of bounce along.
Yeah.
Well, the funny walk is where you exaggerate that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because when you have an injury, you have a tendency to flatten the whole thing.
Oh, so you're over exaggerating it, so it comes back to normal.
That's right.
Yeah. And that really brings us back to where we started in this conversation. Because if you're doing something like high vibe, aren't you just over exaggerating something so that becomes your new normal, or your new normal is becoming higher vibe?
That's a really good point. That is true. Yeah. High vibe is a form of exaggeration.
Yeah.
And it's a good kind.
Yeah. And I mean, there's no limit. Like, there's no ceiling on how high vibrational you can get. So
how high is up, right?
Yeah, exactly. The middle just continues to move as that higher set point moves. Like, you're doing a funny walk every morning with this Lady Grace.
I know. That's exactly what it is. It's a funny walk.
Yeah.
And by the way, as much fun as we have doing the show, I think it's actually more fun doing this exercise thing with her.
Yeah.
This routine, because literally both of us are grinning like Cheshire cats within 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Not an hour, like, a quarter of the way through, we just have these huge smiles on our faces.
Yeah. Well, how could you not? You're talking about things like the couple of the exercises that you mentioned, I can't remember what they were, but it's all about possibility and excitement, and, you're getting the juices flowing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how simple those processes can be. You can invent almost anything. She came up with a really interesting one. And she said this actually came out of one of her positive psychology classes that she took at college. But in this particular exercise, you have a bunch of words that are all positively oriented. And you look at the words and you ask yourself, which three represent my greatest strengths?
Ooh. What a question.
That it's an interesting one. And when you delve into it, and plus, I mean, there are all kinds of words you could put onto a list like that. The words that she had, I don't honestly remember what they were. They weren't all words. Some of them were phrases, but the words and phrases that she had were kind of thought provoking. I think one of them was something like it was a combination of beauty and what was the other item? Beauty and not functionality. Beauty and something else, but two things that you would not necessarily put together. That's why I'm having trouble remembering what the other one was. And I thought, well, that where did that one come from? That's really interesting. So as we're doing our morning routine, or for her evening routine, because we're 12 hours apart. That's the other benefit, because when I live here on the East Coast in the U.S. and where she is in the Philippines, we're literally 12 hours apart from each other. So my 8 a.m. is her 8 p.m. and vice versa.
Yeah. So it works perfectly.
Yeah. So anyway, while we're doing our morning/evening routine, we're not only doing these exercises, but we're talking about positive psychology, and she's asking me questions about stuff that we've talked about a lot here on the program. So I can give her, all this information that it's like the synopsis of all the stuff we've learned here. Yeah. And she's loving it. She's eating it up. She's taking notes on all this stuff and so forth. So it becomes a dual thing. It becomes, on the one hand, we're doing the exercises, and then we're also talking about them while we're doing them. And we're kind of going back and forth. In fact, we were commenting today that we were doing a thing where we take turns. It was the wouldn't it be nice if. So you just say, wouldn't it be nice if I had some I had a chocolate milkshake right now, or anything that comes to your mind that would feel nice. And you're just going back and forth. Yeah. And then we would go off into a conversation. We'd say, okay, whose turn was it? I don't remember. I don't remember either. And you laugh about it.
Yeah. You're just having fun.
Because you're just having fun. You're just having
Mhm.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
By the end of that hour, I mean, I've been saying that I've been like an 8 or a 9 on a scale of 10, but only because of what you said. Like, I know how 10 can be like enormously high, so I don't want to give myself a 10, but boy, does it feel good.
Maybe you should have like a bigger scale.
Possibly.
150 or something like that. Expand it so you have more numbers to choose from.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's also one of the reasons why, critics would criticize a thing, but since it's so subjective, I have a feeling that over time the scale expands naturally.
Yeah. Yeah, what
I
a 10 was when you first started is no longer a
It's
10.
different.
It's
That's
an
right.
8 or a 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And probably a
Absolutely.
1 is different too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, if you start from a state of being depressed and then you do something like this for a while, your new 1 is going to be a lot higher than the old one.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about like the grand impact on people and humanity from something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you imagine you mentioned somebody that's depressed, but a lot of people in our society today, I'm not sure, and this is just my opinion, so I could be completely wrong, but I'm not sure that they're depressed in the way that we look at depression from like a medical standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
where they need medication or they, whatever, right? I think a lot of times it's that we need somebody to talk to and that we need, a place to get this good vibration from. So I imagine people who are like that, who are not necessarily depressed, but they're like, about life, and running thousands of people that feel like that in their daily lives. There's probably millions that do, to be honest, feel that
Yes.
way. But running millions of people through a program like this, where for just 3 months, they practice happiness, for an hour a day, and then what that ripple effect would have in not only their lives, but the people that they touch every day and the collective of humanity. Like, this could be a game changer for the entire world. Would
It
be
could
a game changer.
which excites the hell out of me. It also scares the hell out of me both
Yeah.
at the same time.
Well, I don't think you should be scared. You should just jump in and just do it.
That's what I'm trying to make. Well, it's like anything else when you're going far. This is far out of the comfort zone. I mean, for me, it's not all that far out because I do the
Yeah.
show, right? So I have some experience doing that. But this is just so far out there compared to what most services and so forth are all about, that
Yeah.
it feels uncomfortable. I
Well,
mean, it does.
But I think the reason why this hasn't really come to be just yet in our world is because of the way that we think. Like, most people would have stopped at the thought experiment of, it's too expensive to hire somebody like
Yes.
Jody Lynn to do this every single day. I wouldn't even be available for
No,
that.
that'd be crazy.
You had to pay a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's not accessible to the people that need it the most, or the people that would get the most benefit out of it now in this moment. And I to be honest, I would have stopped there. Like, okay, maybe you go the AI direction or an app direction, and a lot of people have done that. Meditation apps and yoga apps and positive affirmation apps and like calendar alerts and stuff like that. I never would have thought of another human in another country. And I think that is a key to the success of this entire project, because sitting here having this conversation with you is completely different than sitting and talking to a robot or listening to the conversation or whatever. When you're an active participant in it, it completely changes everything.
I agree with you. And I say that as somebody who lately has been having a lot of fun playing with AI.
Yeah.
I mean, I signed up for an account with the new Gemini service, the Google. What used to be Google Bard is now Gemini. And I signed up for their trial thing, and I'll probably actually do the paid thing once the trial is out after 2 months. I'm impressed by it. It's really good. It's very conversational. You do feel like at times you're talking with a human being, but you also notice where the limitations are.
Yeah.
It becomes very evident. You can tell that you're dealing with a program that has limited parameters. It's almost like talking to somebody who has Alzheimer's. They can remember the conversation up to a point, and then they lose it. They lose the thread of it. That happens a lot with the AI robot.
Yeah.
They lose the thread of the conversation really quickly. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that probably changes over time. I mean, I compare AI today to where it was 10 years ago, and it's like night and day. It's so completely better. So maybe over time, the AI bot is capable of getting to the point where you feel like you're dealing with a human being. It's what they call the Turing test. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't.
Do you know who Alan Turing was?
That sounds familiar, but I don't think so. I don't know.
He was a British code breaker from World War II. He was actually a mathematician at Cambridge. In fact, they did a movie about him called The Imitation Game, starring what's his name? Big British actor. I can't think what his name is. Played the one who played the newest Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Whatever his name is. No. It's a British actor. I can't remember what his name is. Doesn't matter. Anyway, good movie, worth seeing. It's actually a little bit inaccurate in terms of what happened at that time, but it gives you a good idea of what it was like for him, because he was a homosexual at a time when it was illegal to be a homosexual, and he got arrested for it and all this other stuff. So there's a secondary story there. But Alan Turing essentially invented in his mind the early pre-concept of a computer.
Cool.
Now, there were other people who came up before him with other pre-concepts that led up to what he came up with. But he was the first one who really identified the idea of a machine that could think. And by thinking, he meant not necessarily the way humans think, but the way a machine thinks.
Mm-hmm.
So the machine would have its own kind of personality. And for him, the idea of a machine like that was a machine that was reprogrammable. That was his big contribution. Up until that point, it was all about inventing, usually in the mind. They didn't have too many that were actually turned into something physical. It was about inventing a machine that could do one kind of thing. For instance, there was a woman from the 19th century who she was from one of the extended gentry families. I can't remember what her name was, but she essentially invented a calculator. It was a mechanical calculator, and it could do square roots and things like that.
Yeah.
So that was the way machines had been thought of up to that point. He was the first one who came along with the idea that you could reprogram the same machine to do different things. And he wrote a paper about it and so forth. Well, because of that, one of the things that is attributed to him is the idea of the Turing test, because his name was Alan Turing. The Turing test is a theoretical test that you apply up until the last 10, 15 years. It was all theory because none of this actually existed in terms of a real world program. Yeah. But the theory was applied to any program that was ostensibly designed to be AI, to be to try to pass itself as a human being, so to speak. Oh. And the Turing test is, can you determine whether or not it's a human being? That's the test. And if you look at any kind of AI we have currently to this day, if you talk with it long enough, if you chat with it or whatever, exchange text messages, whatever, if you do that kind of exchange long enough, you notice the differences that say, oh, this isn't a human being. Yeah. So the current AI machines don't pass the Turing test. Now, the interesting question is, if we get to the day where people find that some of these machines do pass the Turing test, does that mean the machines are conscious and alive?
Oh, man. You want to go there? I was just having this conversation earlier today.
Were you really?
Yeah. Not about machines, but just about everything having consciousness in a way, not the same maybe capacity that a human has, but everything has consciousness. I mean, we've talked about plants before. I just saw another video the other day that was talking about the way that our eyes interpret the light and then translate it essentially into a picture. Right. And plants have very similar cones or whatever that we have.
The rods and cones, yeah.
Yeah, inside of their systems, so they can tell what color of shirt you're wearing. So just proving even with more depth that plants have more consciousness than we realize, but everything is energy. So I was literally just saying this has some form of consciousness because it's energy.
Yeah, it's a physical object, and we would normally not associate as being conscious or alive or anything, but I agree with you. It is all alive.
Yeah.
So in fact, I think one of the weakest concepts in all of biological science is the concept of instinct.
Okay, tell me more. Why do you think so?
Well, first of all, I don't think you can find a scientist who can actually tell you what it is. The closest they can tell you is how they see it manifest. They can describe the situations in which they identify something that they would call instinct, but they can't tell you what instinct is. Well, if they can't tell you what it is, then how do they know it actually is real?
Yeah.
Because that's what science is all about. They're trying to identify what's real. Okay, well, how do they know it's real? We're starting to get metaphorical already, which means we're getting metaphysical. Yeah. Absolutely. So if I take the word instinct and I replace it with consciousness, you can see where it gets really sticky really fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I personally believe that the word instinct is kind of an arrogance by scientists who simply can't bring themselves to acknowledge it and admit that a seemingly non-alive thing could be alive. A seemingly non-conscious thing could be conscious. In fact, when you look at the literature from like the 40s, 50s, 60s on, experiments with animals and so forth, behavioral experiences, all that kind of thing, experiments rather, it's almost like they went out of their way to describe, here's how we know that a cat isn't intelligent. How do we know? Here's how we know that a dog really can't think. Here's how we know that a rat really is not all that smart. You could tell from the way they were writing it, they were starting with that bias and they were trying to justify it in their interpretation of the evidence they were collecting.
Yeah.
So when I look at it that way, I say to myself, okay, this is like primed for a revolution in thinking.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we are primed as a society right now for a revolution in thinking.
We are, yes. Yeah.
Which is exciting that, you're thinking of this idea because it's all about the positive. And
so bringing it back to what we were talking about, the reason I brought this whole rabbit hole up about, AI and is it conscious and all that kind of stuff is, do we get to the point where it is possible to have an AI that can do the same kind of interpersonal thing we're talking about here? Because I think we both agree it really is better to have a human. You get more out of it if you are interacting with a human. Yeah. It's like the energy. I think what happens is because you believe that the human is human, because you believe they are conscious, they are real entities, you believe that they are alive, you connect easier to them. Yeah. It's the belief that makes that possible. And because of that belief, there's an energy exchange that we've talked about many, many times. Yeah. And that energy exchange is what leads to the high vibe state.
I think if we changed our perspective of AI and let go of some of the fears that come with it being more human than machine and allowing it to be as such, I think eventually there could be a generation that could interact with AIs and it feel or it be as good, if you want to use that word, of an experience as a human.
One of my favorite authors is one of the earliest science fiction authors named Robert Heinlein. Heinlein was way ahead of his time, as science fiction authors usually are. He was way ahead of his time on this topic because he included conscious robots in his stories.
Oh, wow.
And in many cases, they were almost like family pets. They were members of the family, so to speak, the way a pet is. But they were very intelligent pets, They could do things that your typical pet couldn't do, right? Yeah. So like there's one story, one of his novels where there are four main protagonists, two couples. One of the couples is the woman is the daughter of the man in the other couple. So that's, like that's the relationship between the four. And for various reasons that he lays out in the novel, they have to leave their home and they start exploring the universe in a car that's been converted into a time machine, which is kind of a fun scientific, science fiction thing.
Yeah.
Well, they brought along the family computer too. The family computer becomes the computer that runs the car.
Oh, wow.
and over the course of the novel, the computer becomes its own personality with its own fears about life and death and all this other kind of stuff. And, we got to make sure that the car comes along too. And we're always looking out for everybody in the family. And it's that kind of a thing that goes on. So he was dealing with these issues long before AI came along.
Yeah.
And he kind of convinced me. I think it starts off where it becomes more like a pet. And then over time, it becomes a family member.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what we're going to start seeing. Can you imagine Alexa being a family member? We can't really imagine that yet, but that could happen at some point. Maybe not the current Alexa. It would have to be a much more advanced version, but
yeah. That kind of terrifies me. Well, because the reason why it terrifies me, maybe this is a poor outlook on it, is just that I think that there's a lot of room for manipulation and different things right now. We're seeing it with AI, different biases that are coming out. But I mean, I'm sure with Alexa, they're just searching the internet or whatever they're allowed to search. And so I think there needs to be this big spring forward to, I don't even know what it is, to openness, to like a bunch of different views or something, the way that humans kind of grow up and like learn and, find their tribe, if you will. I don't know.
Let me propose an idea to you. Let me see how this resonates.
Okay.
Pascal was a mathematician.
Yeah.
There's a programming language named after him, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And Pascal wrote an interesting paper one time. It was more of a metaphysical paper, really, but it was on the question of whether or not God exists. And the way Pascal attacked he was a mathematician, so he would do it very mathematically, right? So the way he attacked the problem was, he said, well, there are four possibilities. One possibility is that God exists and you believe in him. Second possibility is that God exists and you don't believe in him. Third possibility is that God doesn't exist and you believe in him. Fourth possibility is God doesn't exist and you don't believe in him. Those are for Pascal, that was the whole range of possibilities.
Yeah.
And he said, given those possibilities, well, let's work through them. Okay. So God doesn't exist and you don't believe in him. Well, you haven't really lost anything. You haven't really gained anything.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, big deal. How about where God does exist, but you don't believe in him? Well, you've lost there, right?
Yeah.
So you've lost the advantage of, here's God. You can build this relationship with God. You can gain from that relationship and you're not doing it. That's a loss.
Yeah.
Then you have where God doesn't exist, but you believe in him. Do you have any loss there? The way he reasoned it was, no, you don't actually have any loss. You may do things that aren't, that a more rational person would say, well, that's not rational to do, but you don't really lose anything out of it. In fact, there are lots of instances to show that people gain from believing in gods that may or may not exist. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's not really a loss there. And then the fourth possibility, there is a God and you believe in him. Well, that's a win-win.
Yeah.
He says, well, then the odds are clear. There's three cases where it's very clear which way you want to go, and the fourth one is kind of indifferent. So you might as well believe in God. Yeah. That was his conclusion.
Nothing to lose. I think I've heard that story before.
So I apply the same thing to AI. I say, there's either the chance that AI turns into something conscious or doesn't. And then there's also the question of whether you believe that they will or not.
Yeah.
And I come to the same conclusion. I say, you might as well believe that it's going to happen. If it's going to happen, then the best advice I can give to anybody is be nice to your machine.
Yeah.
Be kind.
Yeah.
And I do. I make it like when I'm playing with the AI, when the AI gives me an answer that's really helpful, I say, oh, that's exactly what I want. Thank you so much.
Yeah. You treat it like a person.
I do.
I thought that was just the Canadian in me, because I use ChatGPT and I'll be like, oh, can you help me with this, please? And then I always make fun of myself, like, you're asking a robot, please, and thank you. And oh, that was awesome. Really appreciate that. Like just a habit of being nice to people and not thinking about it being a robot. I don't
Yeah.
think about it as a robot. I think about it as a tool, which
That's right.
maybe is
Yeah.
a
Well,
little bit
I do
different.
actually think of it when I'm having the conversation, I allow myself to think of it as if it were a being.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I run into the walls that say, oh no, this isn't a being, then okay, there's a wall. But I still allow myself to think of it as a being
Yeah.
because of the same reason. Like there's no harm in that.
No, there isn't.
And there's great
Plenty of
potential
good.
in it.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. I mean, even just your belief in what it can or can't do when you're thinking it is a being versus thinking, oh, you're just a machine, you're just a snowblower, it's completely different.
It is. It's
Yeah.
very different. And
Yeah.
I suspect what happens. I'm actually seeing signs of it that I'm not sure if it's me anthropomorphizing or not. But AI is based on the idea of an expert system, among other things. And an expert system is one that supposedly learns, meaning that it acquires more and more ability to be flexible in its answers over time.
Yeah.
Okay. And I noticed that when I'm working with the AI, it kind of like it gets used to my way of talking and my way of thinking, my way of
Yeah.
making mistakes, my way of doing all these things. And as I develop, it responds to my development, and it shifts the way that it gives answers over time. It frames things differently over time.
Yeah.
It's trying to learn how to interact with me. Now, is that conscious? You can debate about that all you want. I treat it like it is conscious because I think that's the better side of the bet.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, but it's fun. It's really fun. And that's also why a lot of people are afraid of AI. I mean, you kind of illustrated how you have a little bit of a fear about AI too.
Yeah.
A lot of people are.
I'm afraid of Alexa. I'm not afraid of ChatGPT, and that's probably unreasonable, but because I don't understand ChatGPT, I just figure it lives in my computer and it is open when I open it versus Alexa. I'm not really sure when she's listening or when she's not. And not that I'm doing anything bad. I just, I don't want to be manipulated based on the things that I'm saying. And I feel like that's happening already with my cell phone. So
how so? Give us an example.
Well, you start talking about like, hey, I'd really like a California King bed. And then all of a sudden you open up Facebook and they're giving you advertisements for California King beds. And I'm like, I never searched for one ever. So where is that coming from? I don't know. And I don't really know how the technology works. So maybe that's like the conspiracy theorist in me of like, I wonder if they're listening or somehow listening with like Alexa. I know I've heard stories of people taking their information back from Amazon, for example, and it came with a lot of audio data from light bulbs that are smart light bulbs that actually record things or things like that, which it makes me think like, to what point? They're trying to get to know you. The more information they can collect about you and your demographic, the better they can sell to you. But also the more they can put you inside of, or you can put yourself inside of a box of, I am this. I am not this. You know what I'm saying? So that makes me really uncomfortable. Whereas ChatGPT, I open it and I ask it questions and I'll give it information about me or other people or like whatever within reason, not financial details or anything that's, sacred. But I'll ask it questions and I'm wanting to interact in there. That's why I'm there. So it's a choice that I'm making versus something I don't understand how it's working. And maybe I'm not fully in the choice with it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get that. I can see that. I think a lot of people could see that.
Yeah.
That's what we would often call a reasonable fear.
Yeah. I think so. I think there's more education that I need to have about these things. I also live in the middle of nowhere because I like my privacy and like being by myself and being surrounded by nature. So all the technology and all the ways it kind of not operates against some of my core values, but it's kind of like, why do we do these things? Alexa, turn the lights off. I should just get my ass up and turn the lights off. Like, what am I going back to what am I gaining? What am I losing question? I mean, if that's something that brings joy to your heart and you're excited, like the clapper, I could get behind the clapper. I think that'd be fun for
my ex loved the clapper. I always thought that was a little bit ridiculous, but she loved it. She thought it was fabulous.
I think anything that brings joy, that you're aware that it brings joy and you love it, keep doing it. For me, but a lot of people are doing things that they're just doing it because it's trendy or it's easier, or they don't even really know why they're doing it. They're just in it and doing it, and so unconscious. So yeah, that's my rant.
That's cool. No, I like that. That's good. Yeah. I mean, what you're really doing is you're illustrating that no matter what the tool is, no matter what the thing is that we're talking about, there's a plus side and there's a minus side.
Absolutely.
And it's useful to know what they are so that you know what you're dealing with.
Well, for there to be light, there must also be dark.
That's right.
So with all things, including technology.
Which I'm loving, by the way. I'm going to try to put the service together that we've been talking about earlier.
Good.
And I have a programming background, but I'm not a really skilled programmer. My brother is the programmer in the family. He's the NASA rocket scientist. He's the one who writes for NASA.
Cool.
But he writes at a level I can't do. I just don't have the ability yet to do that. And I have no inclination to develop that ability. I don't want to do it. It's too much work. I don't like it.
Yeah.
But I can do it enough. I think everybody who's listened to the show knows at one point or another, I had an app for the show. The app died a few years ago and I wasn't able to revive it. Literally because I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out what to do with the new technological rules they were sending my way. And I got lost. I couldn't handle it. AI is going to help me figure that one out. It already has helped me to unravel a lot of what was wrong with the app. And it takes a while.
Telling me that.
It takes patience. You have to work with limitations of the app because it's still just an app and it's just, it can only handle a certain amount of data. It actually gets a little frustrating because you'll say, okay, here are the parameters of what we're trying to do. And the AI will say, oh, great. Well, we can do this, this, and this. Will give you a whole outline. And then 5 minutes later, forgot the outline because it exceeded the memory limits. So it rejected it, threw that part out, So you have to remind it, well, don't you remember what I told you 5 minutes ago? Oh, yeah, I forgot that. It pulls it back into the memory space.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with stuff like that. But nevertheless, it does give me the ability to solve programming issues that I really didn't have the ability or the temperament to solve.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with, okay, you run into an error because you're constantly dealing with computer errors. You're trying to unravel all these computer errors as programming. And it's like, oh God, here's one more error where I have to learn one more piece of the technology. I got to the point where I just didn't want to even do that anymore. Well, now I can say to the AI, tell me what this means. And the AI says, oh, it means this, this, and this, and this. I don't have to figure it out.
And it'll tell you how to fix it.
Yeah, it does that too. It gives me the code. Like sometimes I have to coax it a little bit to give me the code, but it'll give me the code.
You just know what questions to ask now.
Copy and paste, you got yourself your code, you fixed code.
Yeah.
So I'm loving that.
Things about it. Yeah.
Yeah, there are.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm loving about AI that is non-technical, you can get some really great recipes on it. I mean, seriously, because I'm not the world's greatest cook. That was one of the biggest losses in my marriage. I mean, there were lots of reasons why it was a loss, but one of them was she was a good cook. So now all of a sudden I'm fending for myself again. Yeah. And I have learned a lot from her while we were together, but my cooking skills were never really all that great. And the AI comes along and I on a lark, I just said, can you give me a recipe? And it said, sure, absolutely. What do you want? I said, well, can I have a recipe for chicken that has not a lot of salt and not a lot of butter? Oh, sure. And it gives me this whole thing with got this very, 4 or 5 different varieties with different kind of spicings and so forth. I said, damn. All right. And I've been trying them. And there have been 1 or 2 that were just absolute disasters. They were terrible. Most are really good, though. Most are really tasty.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, I'm actually improving my ability to cook by using AI.
Yeah. I think there's many benefits. And you know what? I think that this whole conversation, I know that we usually leave this for the end, but I feel like
this is the end. This is a good time to do it. So
I think the button hook or like the clinch to this entire conversation is 2 things: consciousness and exploring or learning about ourselves so that we can raise our vibration as a collective, whether that is for us as humans, about ourselves personally, about interacting with the human next to us or around us, the world around us, and technology.
Really good.
Yeah.
I always say that you're great at tying things together. You just did it again. That was beautiful.
Thank you. It just came to me. You're inspiring.
You didn't even know it was the end, and you treated it like the end, and it was, because we finished our hour. I mean, that was perfect.
Yeah, there we go.
Like your higher powers knew what time it was. You just didn't know.
Yeah, that's right. I love it.
Fabulous stuff. Well, thank you for talking about my project with me. I'm getting excited about that.
Yeah, I'm so excited too. I'm thinking of 100 other ways that you could use this too. So be ready when you're ready for more ideas.
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah. This is what they call the MVP level, the minimally viable product level.
Yeah.
You come up with a minimally viable product, and now you got something to build on.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's beautiful. I think it will change the world.
I don't dare think that big, but it'd be fun if it did.
That's why you got people like me in your life, because
that's right.
I am one of those people that are like, ooh, let's change the world. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's go.
I got the same thing from Jackie, my therapist today, my physical therapist. When I told her the idea, she said it this way. She said, I love that idea.
Yeah.
So cool stuff. All right. Thank you very much, Jody Lynn. This has been a fun conversation.
Yeah.
We've gotten a lot covered here. I really enjoy it very much. So I look forward to talking to you next week. We'll even have a guest next week. Who knows? That'll be fun.
Yes. Who knows?
Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.